You set the hook.
All right, folks, grab your coffee, sit down and prepare yourselves. We're going to give it 2 minutes.
I know I'm sorry. I didn't know because I'm tired. She's not bothered. Yeah.
When she moved in, I'm like, yeah, I love
Okay, he's right there.
Okay.
I didn't bring you through.
and explodes. There's so much. I still feel it. I love it.
Okay, folks. If you're still in the banquet room, you're here for the state, local, tribal government organization panel. The topic of discussion today is strategic planning and budgeting. I wanted to frame up this panel as a moderator to carry on the conversation that was at the Wyoming Association of Municipalities conference earlier in the month. They talked about, hey, we know that local governments are going through some budget constraints. It's being seen through several different avenues: property tax relief, trying to fund core essential services like EMS and firefighters within cities and small towns. And I'm very excited today to be the moderator of this panel. My name is Christine Emminger, for anyone that doesn't know that yet, and I'm the administrator for the Grants Management Office. I also help do the reporting for the United States Treasury ARPA program. I also assisted the State Auditor's Office in collecting a bunch of documentation to retain on hand for the CARES Act program, which was approximately $1.25 billion. And I also helped the director with some of the consensus revenue estimating group. Co-lead for the project or capital project funds, Diana, though, does most of the reporting and gets all the information collected. Just the reviewer, that's part of our internal control procedure that we have. So we know a lot about that. We're going to start off with a set of introductions to our panelists, and we're gonna kick it away. So, Gibby, I'm gonna pick on you. You gotta go first.
Good morning. I'm Gilbert Ritchie with the Eastern Shoshone Housing Authority. I'm the Housing Services Director, and I assist with grant writing.
I'm Christian Philgraff. I'm a principal at CLA. I'm spent 10 years in government, where I left as a state budget director, and have been doing this for longer than I'd like to think, about 25 years.
I'm Shari Lara. I work for WHAM. I'm the Municipal Finance Director, and I spent 19 years as a city treasurer in Lander.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Watkins from the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a research and public policy organization that helps state leaders develop and implement evidence-based policy, and I specifically study how states manage federal funds.
Hi, I'm Sally Abbott. I'm the Regional Health Administrator with the Office of Assistant Secretary for Health with the Department of Health and Human Services based in Denver.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Eatman, and I'm a consultant working on the Grants Management Office contract. But prior to doing that, I started about a year ago. I worked in Federal Highway Administration for 24 years, and my background is in finance, and I developed all the indirect cost allocation methodologies and policies for Federal Highway Administration.
Hello, I'm Kevin.
So Christian, it seems like you've been around the block. Same with Director Hibbert. I'm glad we have y'all separated. We can't be having you do some things up on this panel. Can you tell us, or want to kick it off the discussion about strategic planning, budgets, especially in small cities and towns and communities, and how it ties in?
Sure, be happy to. And what a great event. I have to tell you, this event has been absolutely amazing. So it's really great to be here and looking for this opportunity. Like I said, I was in government for about 10 years, and after leaving, for a number of years, I traveled around the world, and I would talk about budgeting best practices and budget systems, strategic planning, getting into how do you pay for it. That was always the number one question is, I got this big project, but how do I pay for it? And over the years, I usually give the same advice, right? You look at the bonds you can issue, or COPs, or however you may want to do general revenue, different ways to do it, but don't forget grants, right? And what's in there, looking at your cost allocation plans. It's always a critical thing. Let the feds pay for it, right? If you want to do a statewide or a great big ERP, what are your reimbursements? How do you move them up? How do you make sure you're capturing every one of those dollars? Kevin and I were talking the other day, and we've known each other for, I just said, I don't know how many years, but I think I was thin and had dark hair. Right? So it's been a long time. And the one thing I've learned as I've dealt with him and his peers around the country, Kevin may always be the smartest person in the room, but he's not going to tell you that. And he has a very different sense of things, that he wants to be collaborative. He wants to come up with solutions that are going to help other governments and other organizations around the state. Not only could this event not have taken place anyplace else, the types of groups that are here to learn, and the things that he has done already and is planning on doing in the budget office that help other organizations, nonprofits, colleges, universities, nonprofits, local governments. It's pretty incredible. Cost allocation is one of them, and building a system that will help other organizations be able to recapture those costs. I was reading something this morning, and it said it's not free money, but it is part of it. And I want to talk about that just for a second. There's always concern about going into cost allocation plans and direct cost plans. Everybody's afraid of them, right? They're complicated, and they're complicated for a reason. Who would ever think the federal government would do something that make things easy? Right? But there's at the end of the day, it's just math, right? You know the formulas, you know the rules that go around them, and that's what the budget office is doing right now, is building a system to be able to be used to automate that, so you can capture it, get the rules right. The math comes along and it can be updated. It can be updated as you go. It provides tremendous opportunity and money for for your projects that are out there. This is something to get really excited about when you look at it. I talk about there's a cost to managing the money. You would never be a home builder and just say, okay, I have to pay my people and I have to pay for the material. Right? And you have overhead that goes along with that. You have to account for that. There's a cost to doing it. You don't want to build a $100,000 home to find out you have $20,000 in extra costs that you didn't account for. Right? It's the same way with managing grants. That's what the budget office is helping you with. But it's something you need to recognize yourself and don't overlook it. Capture that money, whether it's direct or indirect. Now, when you start getting into some of the indirect costs, which is where there's a little bit of art and science that goes along with it. There's certain areas that I think are really relevant to Wyoming that you can get back. We were just talking about airports. Well, I worked with one of the largest airports, and we were able to go back retroactively and say, look, these indirect costs weren't right. They went back and negotiated with the Cognizant agency, and for 3 years that we did it, they received about $75 million a year in reimbursement. So this is real money that can come back. And it would come back in the smaller increments, but the aggregate was huge. Now, big airport, it's a little different. FEMA, same way. And I've talked to a number of people and helped a number of places that have received FEMA money, and they just use a 10 or 15% de minimis rate to go in. When you talk to them, say, well, what's really your overhead? What's your indirect? They're probably 40 or 50%. FEMA, you can go back and they'll pay you. They'll pay you the entire thing above the grant. If you can show, you have to do it before the grant officially closed on the federal side, but if you can show, if you had $1 million grant and you find out you had $200,000 of additional indirects, they'll give you that, and it comes back unrestricted. Right? So it's something that this can be real money for you, and it's what you need. It's what you need to do. I guess I would say, we have a lot of people here to talk, but I would say use the budget officer. You have tremendous resources available to you. Pick up the phone and call. Don't be afraid of doing this. Right? This is real money that you can get back. I keep saying that because it will make a difference. Over my career, I have seen people really go and start doing allocation plans and indirect cost plans and have that, wow, I had no idea that you could do that. And they paid me to do it. Well, now you have a resource that's going to do it for you. You have resources you can pick up and call and say, how can we do this? Right? This can't be understated. What you have available to you is really powerful, and you need to be on board to use it.
Kate, do you want to offer some insight on what other states are doing with their federal funds?
Yeah, so like I said, I study how states manage federal funding, which makes up a huge portion of state budgets. Nationwide, federal funding made up 34% of state budgets. In 2024, in Wyoming, federal funds made up 40% of your state budget. So this is a big pot of money, which is why my team wanted to study these funds more in depth and understand that the challenges states face while managing these funds. And to do that, we interviewed fiscal leaders from 12 different states to just really hear what they were experiencing. And there's more details in our full report and also in the resource guide on the Grant Summit website. There's details on the report, and then also some Wyoming specific fiscal indicators that Pew does with addition to their fiscal work. But one of the main challenges states face while managing federal funds is something you guys all know, that these funding streams are really complicated and they require the proper workforce, they require training, they require technology to really get the most out of these dollars and make the greatest impact to constituents. And we also heard from the interviews that many states at the same time were concerned about getting local governments funding. they experience many of the same issues that state government actors face, but often with even fewer resources. So we heard some states taking action. I also want to acknowledge a lot of the examples we feature in the report are very similar to the examples that the Wyoming Grant Management Office is already taking. But I also wanted to share some here on how other states are taking action. Kentucky, for example, created a program called the Grant Program to help their state maximize their infrastructure investment amid the IIJA funding, and that was specifically to help communities and nonprofits apply for grants, and they created a $200 million matching fund to help communities meet those matching requirements that often accompany those grants. 2% of that matching fund was set aside for technical assistance that was provided by a local nonprofit. And the state saw an 8-to-1 return on investment from the matching fund in their pilot program. So in practice, this looks like a rural public health department employee who never had grant training, attending a 2-day Grants 101 summit, and scoring a $1 million grant to remodel their public health buildings, to purchase emergency equipment, and the state is really seeing tangible impacts by helping dozens of people with diabetes management. In another case, a rural Appalachian county needed some water infrastructure upgrades. They didn't have the financial means to do it themselves, and the federal matching requirement was too large of a hurdle. So they, through this grant program, were able to leverage $19 million into a 2000 and only had to contribute $200,000 of their own funds. And the county is really looking at this as not only a public health and infrastructure win, but a long-term economic growth win, as they can point to their reliable water infrastructure when they recruit employers to the area. The last challenge I just wanted to mention real quick is that due to the nature of federal funding and existing silos between levels of government and even within government, it can be really difficult to strategically coordinate on these funds and direct them to state priorities. So to respond to this, we heard some states hold similar grant summits to this one to not only train grantees, but also align grant teams on state priorities. So Hawaii, as part of a larger effort to maximize their IIJA funds and IRA funds, in 2024 held a grant summit where they invited federal actors where they could forge relationships and also identify grants that would be relevant to their communities. They also created working groups by issue area that were priorities in the state. So at the Grant Summit and thereafter, they could meet, share best practices, share challenges they were experiencing, and also share the grants that they were pursuing. Those are a few examples, and hopefully some of the takeaways are interesting. It's you take and apply all the resources and practices that you learned at this conference. And again, I do want to acknowledge that a lot of this work are very similar to the work that the Wyoming Grants Management Office is doing through the summit, opportunities to meet federal partners and forge those relationships, and also by responding to hundreds of technical assistance requests in just over 2 years. And the last thing I just want to say is states share many budgetary challenges, but there's no single path to fiscal sustainability. So Hugh is always here to talk through some of the challenges you're facing, and we honestly would just love to hear your experiences with managing these funds.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for shouting out to the state of Hawaii. We actually talked to them back in July of 2024 when we first launched the Wyoming Grants Management Office, told them about our funding summit, and I am so glad to hear that they have taken a great benefit to what we're doing in Wyoming. They also took another great benefit from us, which was our budget system. And thank you for teeing it up, and Christian, thank you for teeing it up because there is a lot of information that's going on out there. The state budget department can help facilitate that. And Director Hibbert, would you like to talk about how we can assist these local governments and tribal governments and organizations with these items that have been identified with the management of federal funds? And in addition to that, the indirect costs that we can recoup.
Thank you, Christine. The states that have the similar GMO lists have all contacted us. It's pretty nice that we have that. And I don't know if you saw the press release for the governor's conversation yesterday, but that was mentioned in that press release. We didn't name them outright, but we have been involved with having communications with cabinet members, governor's policy office. We actually testified at a interim meeting on local governments with a different state. We recently had an interview with another state's LSO staff. So everybody is on eyes of Wyoming. This whole grant GMO conversation is centered on what we're talking about today right now. We want to leverage every opportunity that we have, whether it's federal funds, state money, local participation. There's a lot of nonprofits out there, and there's also a lot of contributors out there that are helping us out. But one of the things that we were really excited to uncover today, and Christian, you did a really good start to set the hook on that, is we're not capturing our administrative costs. When you apply for a grant, the federal government expects that there's going to be costs associated with administering a grant. There's been this word floating around this week, game. Well, what does a game mean? Well, the federal government isn't going to judge you when you have asked for your administrative costs. In fact, they're probably going to be looking at your grant to see, well, are they actually prepared to deliver that? And if you haven't discussed how you're going to administer it, particularly with some thresholds, like the $1 million threshold that requires a single audit, some other things that Bob will be talking about here in a minute. But what we want to make sure that everybody steps away from today is, you heard Pew say that Wyoming's budget is 40% federally funded. Yep. We've got $12 billion budget, so you can do the math. In that, there's 6.7 billion, 6.7 billion. That is what we have in 600 series. 600 series is flow-through grants from the state of Wyoming to local governments. We want to make certain, typically the state of Wyoming, we don't intercept the administrative costs except for on our administrative portion. We hand those down. We want to make sure that the local governments have the understanding that they have two choices. And we'll get into these choices in a little bit. In 2012, OMB researched what the cost of administration would be on a grant, and they came out with the 10% de minimis rate. We will give you 10%, no questions asked, no documentation other than giving an MOU with your cognizant agency that you're effectuating that. In October of 2024, OMB increased that to 15%. OMB recognizes that on average, it costs 15% to administer a grant. That's the de minimis rate. And if you're below $35 million in your programs, you do not have to do the indirect cost. If you're above $1 million, expect to have to do a single audit. And remember, when this all started in 2012, $1 million is not what $1 million is today. So all of these little things that we used to do are now still little in the grand scheme of things, but they've crossed the threshold of $1 million. So what we want to talk about today as what the real gold nugget is making certain that the local governments understand that they have these choices. De minimis is there and available for you. You're not going to get dinged by your federal partner. And I'll also make this statement. Imagine that you have a formula fund and your X is $100. That's what you're going to get. And you decide that, well, I want to put that $100 on this project. I do not want to have the de minimis. Well, imagine this. You still have $100, you take the $15, you put it in your de minimis, you can keep it. You can still take that $15 to that project that you desire to do. There's nothing stopping you from completing that $100 project and having that de minimis just flow through on that project. Nothing. What does happen is that de minimis is not entangled with federal requirements any longer. So just think about this, you're not in harm's way by doing the de minimis rate, you're just creating flexibility. But if you're accurately measuring your administrative costs and putting it into your grants, then you're going to be successful with that grant. And typically, those grants, there's an expectation that you do have administrative costs. Now, if you cross the $35 million threshold, you want assistance with your indirect cost allocation, by all means, we can do that. So that's just setting the hook for right now, and we'll just keep rolling and see where we land.
Thanks, Director Hibbert. There is some fear with identifying indirect costs and the whole conversation around cost allocation. GMO can help with maximizing opportunities, especially around these shared service costs and the documentation around it. Bob, any addition to the conversation that you would like to add from your lens?
Sure. Thank you, and Christian and Director, I appreciate your comments because it's kind of going to tie into exactly what I wanted to talk about. And if you did attend any of my sessions, I talked about this a little bit. But just as Christian and the Director said, if you don't claim indirect costs, you're basically leaving money on the table. So think about it. As the Director said, the government's not going to ding you because they're the ones that put it in the regulations. So the Office of Management and Budget, which is basically the entity that's under the president, it's the federal agency that basically is responsible for writing 2 CFR 200. They're the ones that put the requirement for de minimis rate in the regulation. So, I don't understand why the federal government would ding somebody for doing something that's, allowed per the regulations. So as the Director mentioned, actually I'm going to say prior to 2014, which is when 2 CFR 200 came out, there was not a de minimis rate. So local governments could not claim indirect costs unless they went through this very difficult process of developing a cost allocation plan. Back in 2008, I was in Wyoming working at Federal Highway Administration. The Director was at WYDOT, and WYDOT actually developed a very comprehensive indirect cost allocation proposal. Back in 2008, it was their very first one. It was my very first one to review, and it was actually used as a basis for how other state DOTs will develop indirect cost allocation plans in the future. And so I always used, in my job after I left Wyoming, I actually became responsible for overseeing indirect cost allocations in Federal Highway Administration, and we did use the Wyoming plan as an example. And I feel like anybody now, because there is the de minimis rate available, when you go out and apply for a project out, for whatever project you have, make sure you include that 15% in your budget. So you're going to, when you're doing your budgets and you're applying for grants, you think about, okay, here's what it's going to cost for us to deliver this. You're thinking about direct costs, those things that, exactly you can identify to your project, but what you might not think about are those administrative costs or those overhead costs. I've actually seen and experienced in my career where people have applied for a grant, they've been awarded a grant, and they did not account for those administrative costs, and they actually had to, return the grant, or they could not proceed because they didn't think about, what it was going to cost to actually deliver the grant. So keep those things in mind, build that 15% into your budget, and that's going to, actually allow you to use some of your local dollars that you normally would have been paying your overhead costs for, and now you're going to have more flexibility with those, and you can use them for other things, like maybe match, because federal grants have match a lot of times, and if you're using a 15% de minimis and you're building that into your grant to cover some of those overhead costs, that could also help you kind of meet your match a little bit, because 20% match, and if you're thinking about trying to pay for that with direct costs, if you have some of your indirect costs being picked up by the federal government by using the de minimis, it's going to make your other funds more flexible. So if you have any questions on any of this, because I know it's a very complex topic, the GMO is here to help out.
Bob, I think we already got like 2 or 3 questions just from the grant training about indirect costs. And really, the indirect cost gives you the opportunity to stretch the dollar further. It gives you more flexibility within your budget. Shari, from a local government perspective, how can that help?
Well, I screwed up. So Christian and I are best friends now because he has enlightened me. In all my years that I worked for the city, I did a ton of grants, and my mindset was always, we've already budgeted our wages, we've already budgeted our overhead, we've got money to cover that, and the project cost always seemed to be what I had in a grant. So I thought, okay, I never went after it, just because I thought we already had it covered. So I was always trying to make our airport be self-sufficient. I wanted it to fund itself. So I don't know how many of you have an airport that you're trying to fund, but every year they allocate so much money to WIDA and FAA, allocate your money and how much you have to spend. And on a hard year, a hit of 150,000 is impactful for a small budget for a general government to come out of to make that match money. So I was trying to make my airport self-sufficient so it could cover those years when we had to pay that 2% or that 4% of that grant. Well, we took on airport fuel. We started selling the fuel. That started helping. But had we been using this, we could have recouped some money to my airport fund. And then now this morning, Christian tells me I can go back and ask for more for those past years where we didn't ask for it. And in all my years, I always thought if you got awarded that money, that was it. That was the bottom line. You couldn't go back and ask for more. And talking with Christian, you can go back and ask for more. So if you got grants and they were awarded, they ended up being the total cost of your project, and then you go back and you figure what your administrative costs are, you can go back and get those monies for 3 years.
It's a certain amount of time, yeah.
Yeah, they have a limitation, but it enlightened me because, and I never thought about taking it to my general fund. I always thought about just taking it to my airport fund just because I was making it self-sufficient. But we did get federal grants that we could have done that even to our general fund, that would have given us unrestricted monies. And we could have put them anywhere, even if we had a carryover, we could have taken them as unrestricted money. So just working with Christian on that enlightened me. We had FEMA come in 2010. They figured all the direct costs and indirect costs when they did all that. I didn't even mess with doing it. So I'm enlightened to try to go back and get more money.
Yeah, it's not a blanket statement. And I use an example of biggest airport in the world, I believe. But I'm looking around the room and I don't think there's a lot of folks that are getting grants of that size, right? That you're going to get that. But there's a lot of folks here, and I've had an awful lot of clients. I love this stuff, right? This is energizing to me. I made a mistake one day talking about something like this, and I had a telephone actually at the time, and I had a headset, and I meets when I talk, and I said, this is really sexy stuff to the team on the phone. And I hung up the phone, and my wife came up to me, finger in my chest, saying, don't you ever refer to this stuff as sexy again. Yeah, but I think it's cool, right? It comes down to public policy and good government and the things that you want to do. So you look what's going on right now. We're all seeing the things that are taking place around grants, fraud, waste, and abuse, right? It's scary, right? There's a lot of people who are going to go to prison for a long period of time. But that's not impacting the people in this room, right? This is the feds. I've been dealing with the feds on some of these issues. They want to pay this money. They want to pay it to the right people for the right reasons. That's the difference. So don't be afraid of it. Work with GMO to learn how to stay within the rules, within the guidelines. That gives you an extra buffer. Make sure you're doing it right. The feds will talk to you about it, but don't not spend the money. Don't take that $100,000 grant and not allocate the pieces aside. As Kevin said, he asked me to say something about this yesterday. It's unrestricted, right? It's now your money, right? If you want to use it on something else, and if it's 1,000 here, 1,000 there, and also you're talking about real funds. You save that up. Or you spend it, but if you save it, you can get into real dollars for your organization that you can use and repurpose for things that you need that you may not have budgeted for. Those contingencies that came up, something on a ramp in the airport that you didn't think about, or that just happened. Wind came through and knocked part of a building down. Those types of things. It's really powerful, and the resources you have. There's no other state that's doing this, right? There's no place else that does this and has it set up, and then putting in a system to help all of you. From tribal organizations, nonprofits, other governments, small businesses. It's really incredibly powerful, and it could generate a lot of money for the citizens of Wyoming to be able to perform services and deliver services.
Thank you, Christian. And just to clarify, when you do a cost clearance, it allows you to take that money and have no federal entanglements. We're always looking for avenues to bring more money into our cities and our small towns and our local governments. And doing the work now, which is difficult. We're not here to say it isn't difficult. When you do the work, it's gonna reward you at the end of the day. And putting in the time now and the effort now can provide tremendous amounts of return. And the Grants Management Office and the entire State Budget Department is here to help you with that process. I'm gonna just segue a little bit. Sometimes it's not always about applying for federal dollars though. It's also state dollars that matter most, and especially to our tribal governments, our small businesses, and our nonprofits through different avenues in the state. Gibby, would you like to provide and reflect on that?
On the state funding perspective? Okay, so the Eastern Shoshone Housing Authority, we actually did apply for a state grant, the Housing Needs Grant, and so it was a new experience for us. We were able to submit an application, and the committee made their recommendations to the SLIP board. And so we went through the whole process, and when it got to the board itself, then they didn't they didn't take the recommendations provided by the committee. They went ahead and went on their own path. So it was kind of a learning experience on that regard.
Yeah, and it's difficult because sometimes our legislature only appropriates a small amount of dollars just to see where things go. And as we identify these avenues in these areas to try to reap the rewards and collect more benefits and get more money into our state and local governments, sometimes we're not always aware about the different avenues and opportunities that are made available. And part of the reason is because some of those are not made available on grants.gov.
Exactly, yeah.
Sally, would you like to add any color to that?
Thanks, sorry. Yeah, so thank you. And I want to start out by saying that, you know, I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help. But that is not always something that people actually think. One of the benefits about us being based in a regional office, so I'm based in Denver, which is not all that far from Wyoming, is that we're on the same time zone and we're here. I know significantly less about the process around indirect costs, around budgeting, than most other people here on the panel. I was told that HHS makes decisions about indirect costs for the state of Wyoming, and I did not know that. And I'm gonna be the first to say, if somebody comes to me and asks me questions, I don't know the answer, but I will find it out for you. And I've done this repeatedly, often getting put in touch by Kathy or by Drew or Christina, from somebody in Wyoming of, okay, let me ask some more questions, let me figure this out, and let me get back to you. And then getting in touch with the right part of HHS. HHS is a huge department with $1 trillion of funding per year, and there is no way that I could have any of the answers, and I'm very comfortable saying that I don't have the answer to that, but I'll find that. But I also wanted to point out to a different part of funding from the federal government that isn't often known about, that's not on grants.gov, it's not on the sort of contract sites. Those are the challenges and the prizes. So it used to be challenge.gov, now it's on usa.gov/challenge. But if you go to challenge.gov, it'll tell you where to go, because I can't remember the change that quickly. There are challenges that are often implemented the same way that grants are once they're awarded, but sometimes they're just prize money for innovative ideas. There's one right now on ACL Caregiver AI Prize Challenge. I don't know what that is, but it sounds really interesting. And that's a prize, so it is not something that you're sort of, it's just money. Cultivating Connected Communities Challenge, and ACL is the part of HHS that it's administration, community living, it does healthy aging, it does aging in place, it does senior centers, that type of work. These are direct prize to state, local agencies, departments. They are also to community members, innovators, hobbyists. Connecting talent to opportunity. There's a DOT Bots Challenge. Halt the Hitchhiker Invasive Species Challenge. These are all things that are open right now that you can go to. There's also one on tick-borne illnesses that is on people who have experienced tick-borne illnesses and sort of talking about it, and that's just straight prize money. So that's another place that there is federal government dollars. It's often not known about or not use that are supposed to have a lower barrier to entry. So there's both challenges looking at innovative ideas that can sort of go through different processes of a very novel idea, getting to more advanced idea. And those are meant a bit more like grants or other types. And then there are these prize monies. And those, generally speaking, are on challenge, on USA.gov/challenge. But sometimes, because we like to make it easy, every department will not get their information up there right away and on the challenge website, and it'll be on the department or agency website. So that's also a fun bit. I try to send these out. We have a lot of the sort of money that the federal government does and the HHS does goes to the state and it goes out again, because there are also other grants opportunities. And we had some that it was my part of HHS, it was a different part of HHS, dropped like 10 last week or the week before that are large things, and then another part of HHS. If I see those, sometimes I will just send them straight. I think I did that last week. I sent them directly to Christine. So like, this is a short turnaround. We aren't in control of that right now. And we know that it's important to make sure that they get out. And what I would like to see is the most money possible go to the states that I work to support of, which includes Wyoming.
Sally, can you comment, the calculus of the award when you're reviewing it and determining the amount, does it include cost allocation?
If I'm looking at an award as sort of a technical person, as someone who knows more about sort of the technical information, I have nothing to do with the cost allocation. It makes no difference on the award. That's the budget office, that's the other parts, and sort of determining which is the sort of best idea or the idea that comes across the strongest or scores the highest. That's not part of the calculus on that side.
Great, thank you. So we've identified these different avenues to get money into our cities and our towns and our tribes. Smaller amounts of money can be helpful, and it helps build the ideas for further innovation and for further stratification for these much larger, much complex federal awards, where you can then reap the benefit of indirect cost rates and get that money that has no federal entanglements on it. You can use that money for what you need. A lot of people come to the grants management office. Do you have a grant to help hire an administrative assistant? Do you have grant funds to help hire an executive director to help us build this project or a museum? The answer is no, we don't. But the other answer is you need to do the work now. You need to identify your indirect cost rates so that you can reap some of these benefits. So going back to the indirect cost rates, can we talk about how it's calculated? Bob, do you have any advice or experience on some of the top hitting items that cities, towns, locals, tribal governments can use to help calculate this, and what the grants management office can possibly do in the future to assist these individuals with this?
Sure, thank you. So in order to calculate, it's actually pretty easy. So if you're claiming the de minimis rate, which is 15%, it says in the regulations that you can charge that 15% to certain direct costs. And so there's very specific, if you read into 2 CFR, I mean, we don't have the definitions right in front of us, but basically it allows you to charge the 15% to direct costs like salaries and wages, supplies and materials, and these are all costs that are specific to a grant, so these would be considered direct costs. And so every time you charge a direct staff employee who's working on a grant, you can charge an additional 15% on their salary. And that's how you basically recoup the indirect costs for your program. Now, the one thing to remember though, is there are certain types of costs that you can't charge the 15% to. So when you are going to use a de minimis rate, you just have to make sure that you're not charging to those excluded items. Now, the cool thing about an indirect cost using de minimis is you don't need any paperwork. You don't need to show any kind of adjustments. You don't need to show the federal government really anything. All you have to say is, hey, we're going to claim de minimis rate. We qualify because we received less than $35 million in direct federal funds. As the director mentioned, that's one of the thresholds that basically, excludes very large organizations from claiming a de minimis rate. But most, I would say most, and I think we were looking actually earlier today, and other than the state, I don't know of any localities that receive $35 million or more in direct federal funds. So, and I could be wrong, but we did a little research and I didn't see very many. So all communities in Wyoming are going to be able to qualify for a de minimis rate. And I highly recommend that you
Director Hibbert, I think we actually have a recent example about this, how we just went through the budget session. You want to provide?
Thank you, Christine. The state budget department put in a request, and actually the grants management office is one of that. That was funded. That's great. We're going to be here to help. But we also put in a request for modernization of cost allocation. That modernization cost allocation, we will build a calculator for you. We will show you what you can and what you can't do. You'll be able to have that. We will show you all the regulations and how they tie into it, no different than what we did on the ARPA portal. You'll be able to drill into those and see that. The most significant thing is that we do have a consultant. That contract most likely will get signed today or tomorrow or maybe Monday, and we'll kick that off. So then we will have that on our grants management website so you can go in there and you can use that calculator. So if there's any anxiety about this, is that we have Clifton Larson Allen, thank you, Kristen, he's one of them, and also Haggerty. You've seen this. That's how we punch above our weight. So when you get into this and you have questions, just let us know and we'll help you. But you will see a calculator and you'll be able to go through the process of doing your de minimis. And if you have an indirect cost rate, then you can't go de minimis. There's a rule on that. I'm not aware of any. Maybe Cheyenne and Casper has an indirect cost rate. But if you do have an indirect cost rate, then we will go through the process of helping you calculate that. In simple terms, in 101 cost allocation today, 101 is you have a administrative cost centers. Takes the state of Wyoming, the state budget department, the treasurer's office, risk management, archives. Those are administrative cost centers where we calculate how much by the audit, they're specific to the audit. That's the source of the administrative cost. Then you have a method. The method is the math. So imagine that you're clearing the cost of your email system, which we do. It's an administrative cost. That email system is simply distributed, predicated upon the number of email addresses an agency has, the total number of email addresses in the state of Wyoming. That's the method. That's the math. And then at the tail end of that, you have the target. Well, who's going to pay? Well, we have 100 agencies in Wyoming, and we calculate all that for all those agencies. And in Wyoming, it's finite. We can't have the Department of Health pay for the Department of State Parks actual indirect costs. That's a prohibition. We never do that. And we have all this done through the Federal Office of Health and Human Services. They're the ones that look at this and say, yes, green light, yellow light, or you've gone too far to that extent. But I will just end it with this. The Federal Office of Health and Human Services has used Wyoming as an example on best practice for cost allocation.
Thank you, Director Hibbert, and I believe that we also helped the Forestry Division with increasing that de minimis rate from 10 to 15% with the onset of the October 2024 increase to 15%, which is going to provide a tremendous benefit to our state, especially whenever it comes to wildfires. Thank goodness that we have somebody at the helm of our state budget department to help assist our state with this and ensure that we are getting what we need after we go and try to battle these wildfires and really anything for this matter. Director, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Christine, for that reminder. That is the de minimis rate that changed from 10 to 15% in October 2024. And we did increase that, and we went through the MOU with the cognizant agency. And in this case, it goes into the revolving fund. The revolving fund is there for the county fire, city fire. If you're aware of the revolving fund, that money was actually benefits directly to the counties. We didn't capture it for the state, we captured it for the local governments in the revolving fund.
Everything that we do at the state budget department and really within the grants management office too, we are absolutely willing to share. We have a lot of incredibly smart, educated folks that work with us. We have the inclusion of 2 new state budget department employees that got to be with us today. They got to learn with you and alongside you. And we are very grateful for that because we will absolutely share any wealth of knowledge that we have on any process, on any methodology, on any assistance that you need to share it with you and how we did it and how we were made successful. As we wrap up this panel, are there any last remarks? Go ahead, Gibby.
Sure, I'd like to make a note also that, the indirect costs under CFR 200 have, for an example, administrative costs that are allowable for salaries and wages. But under the Native American Housing Self-Determination Act, it's different. That's not an allowable activity. So I think maybe if the state familiarizes themselves with the rules and regulations of NAHASA, they can see some of the differences when it comes to those indirect and indirect costs.
Thank you, Gibby. And that actually goes back into the Constitution. There's actually a statement in there on how that's calculated.
And you don't know you don't know what you don't know. So thank you for sharing that, because there are exclusions and they need to be identified, and that's what Clifton Larson Allen is going to actually help the state walk through and ensure is in our Power BI automated methodology for statewide cost allocation. This is an incredible discussion. Last comments, last words of advice.
I'll have one. I talked to somebody, a friend of mine in OMB the other day, and we were talking about everything going on with Medicaid and all the fraud they're finding. And his comment to me is, can you just imagine what we can do with that money when we get it back? And it goes out to the people in this room, right, or to the organizations in this room, and that's what's important. I've said since the administration changed, whether you love or hate them, the world has changed. And the way federal funding is coming out, right? Is the Department of Education going away? I don't think so. But the way they fund is going to, right? There's going to be across the board, we're seeing it already, how many more grants are going out. And with that is going to come some of the accountability, and now we're seeing enforcement. But looking at, I think you'll end up getting a lot more grants over the next several years. I think you'll be eligible for more. I think there'll be more funding streams available. But with that comes some of the requirements, and looking at the opportunities there, like the indirect costs, capturing them to even further help your organizations. So you have an opportunity here to be way ahead of the curve, in my opinion. And I think it's something great that the state and the director have set up with his team to make this an opportunity for all the organizations in the state.
Christine, do we have time for questions?
My advice would be document, because if they come back and they look at any of your documents, which our flood of 2010 for FEMA, they came back and they looked at all of your documents, make sure you have how you're coming up with those costs.
We do have time for questions. We're just giving final thoughts, and we're going to open it up to the audience. I know that this is a very large topic of conversation. It's kind of confusing. We're here to demystify the confusion.
I would just say that this is a great opportunity for everyone to think strategically about these funds. And, you know, not every state has a grant summit like this. So it's a great opportunity to break down those silos and share best practices with one another.
My point, just reach out and ask. Sometimes one of the reasons I like the questions is because I learn so much, and then sometimes I share the information I learned from Wyoming, from other states, because Wyoming really is always ahead of the game on figuring out how to do more with less.
My only thing kind of to follow up with something that Christian said is 2 CFR 200 is being updated, if you're not familiar. So I think the public comments open until July 15th. And then the expectation, unless, you know, other entities, I know they're asking for extensions and stuff for review, but the expectation is it's supposed to be out by October 1st. And one of the big things in there is, you know, they didn't really touch on indirect costs a whole lot, but one of the things that they did touch on that kind of addresses what Christian was talking about is more oversight. So kind of expect there to be, you know, opportunities out there and doing everything, but I think the federal government and some of the way they've updated the 2 CFR is, you know, there is going to be more oversight. There's going to be more checks. So it's very important, you know, and also to address the documentation. Yes, please keep your documentation. Make sure that you are, you know, covering yourself and having that documentation, because if you don't have it, It didn't exist.
One thing I would point out, anytime there's an update to a federal regulation, it is up for public comment first, so you can get a preview of what's likely going to be put in there based on what's up for public comment.
Thank you for that, Sally. It is a proposed change at this time, and you can submit comments anonymously. So remember that. Director Hibbard.
Yes, Bob is correct. We got a communication from HHS that they are going to get more oversight to this process. Fortunately, we had the foresight to get in the budget to modernize our cost allocation and prepare ourselves to make this work for everybody.
We're going to open it up for questions at this time. You'll see Harrison with a microphone around here. Let us know. We're here to help. We have a lot of people that are intelligent, that are subject matter experts up here to ask questions to. Oh, I see.
He's asking you to come this direction.
Yes. You're out of the shot, Christine.
Raise your hand if you know what an indirect cost rate is. Raise your other hand if you've been utilizing it. Have you guys been met with any challenges recently? Is it something you'd like to review? Probably not.
This is more a comment than a question. So I'm Laramie County, so we're a larger county. We're usually around 30 million, so we're still under that threshold. We are all over the board with indirect costs. So we have a lot of programs or projects that we do not charge indirect costs. Our county commissioners feel that that funding is better spent on those projects. And so when those tough decisions come in, for example, TANF, we would rather see the funding go to Boys and Girls Club, Climb Wyoming. And so across the board, I can only imagine these smaller communities, that hard decision it is whether to take those indirect costs and how to allocate that or track that, because even in a larger county, we're not doing that consistently.
So a little history on that from Bob and my perspective. We had the same challenge with the Transportation Commission. It wasn't an easy conversation to say, we need to have the indirect cost allocation implemented. So in formula money at YDOT, we didn't get any more money. That's what you're saying. We're not going to get a dime more. But we finally implemented it because what happens is you convert the money from federally entangled to your own money. And if your commission could understand that they would have all this flexibility if they did the indirect cost, they can still channel it directly to TANF, to fire, whatever they want to do. But now they have no federal entanglements. When that finally caught on at YDOT, and we implemented our indirect cost allocation, we're talking $20 million that the Transportation Commission then could go out and rather than spending it, having to spend it on the interstate or the national highway system by the formula, they could actually go out. We have a walkway that we need to correct because we don't want to put children's lives in danger. So just, that's the message that we're really trying to get across today. And there is this myth that's associated with it. We want the money to come directly to the program. Nobody's stopping you from doing that. That still resides in the commission's responsibility. But what you get is unentangled dollars that you can implement to the program that you desire straight through if you want, or you can have differences because maybe there's a gap in the federal fund. You can fund that gap in that same program because maybe TANF doesn't do exactly this. You get that opportunity. That's really what we wanted to make sure that happened today, was we communicated that, because that's a myth. It truly is, but it's a solid myth. We want to make sure that the money goes directly to the program. Fine, you want to do that, you still have that option. So please consider that when you're making these decisions.
I just want to add on, I've looked at statistics. It's shocking how much money in grants goes unspent. And it shouldn't, right? It's the money that's being given for service or a purpose. And the message that the director was giving you about taking the indirects, it's your money at that point. You can still give it to TANF. that's where it needs to go. But if you have something else that you fulfill your obligations or your desire on that side, you can do something else with it. Don't let the money go back. Keep it. The granting agency wants you to spend it. They want to use it, so take advantage of that.
So I'm very sympathetic to your challenge, very sympathetic to that challenge.
Actually, I just have a question. So on a CFA, a schedule of federal awards, when you're filling that out for your auditor, are you then, if you take indirect costs, are you then reporting that as an expense on it? Does anyone know that?
Laramie County is on our expenditures for the indirect costs.
Albany County does not, and we still deposit on it. Any indirect costs that we get goes back into our general fund at Albany County, and then is used then the next year roughly in general funds. But we do not count that on our audit.
You don't put that on your CFA?
Or no, we do not put it on our CFA. Once we collect that fund, because we consider it as payment into the county, we don't consider it as funds then going back out into that program. But I mean, I'm not the auditor, but we pass it, so.
Typically, imagine this, is that everybody can understand FICA and the CFA relationship, the retirement, the benefit aspect, and the CFA relationship on the federal funds. Think of the indirect cost allocation or the de minimis rate, no different from that when you have a direct bill, when it becomes allowable cost. That's how the process works when we established it, to say, we're just going to treat this as one of the functions of the cost that we allocate across the center. So it just rides along with those allowable direct costs.
So my follow-up is, this is a great discussion, but what can we do as local entities? How can we educate our elected officials to take advantage, do the indirect costs, make it a policy, make it formal? Because I think so many of us are doing the work, but it's our elected officials that are making those decisions on our entities' behalf. So what can we do to kind of push this subject forward and look at benefiting our communities with that? Thank you.
I would, as a local government, as a city municipality, I would put it in a resolution form so that you know that your whole governing body determined that that was what their idea was at the time to handle that. And that I think you have to explain the benefit to them, that the money is, it's already available. You just have to ask for it, and it's money that can go to your general fund. It's unanticipated funds that you could use for the year or carry forward or put towards a project every year.
That's a great question, a great idea. And really what we're doing today is we're planting that seed so that we get a good germination of what it really truly is and what the advantages and disadvantages are of that. But we're more than willing, and you'll see this through the process of the implementation of our modernization of the cost allocation. But we're more than willing to help you with that conversation. We need to have a regional exercise directly to where your commission can participate. If you want to invite that regional exercise, with Robert Eaton will come in, we can sit down there, we can explain it. We don't make the decision, right? We don't do that. What we do is we just lay it out for you so that you can make a qualified decision. That's the instruction that Governor Gordon has for me when I'm at the Joint Appropriations Committee. Kevin, please help them make good, solid decisions that they understand. That's what we can help you do. That would be the germination aspect of it.
Hi, it's Bill again. So anyone who can answer this question, maybe help enlighten me. So I'm curious, Kevin, about, you talk about how you doing your indirect cost rate allocation, using your indirect cost rate allocation, what was the term you used? It takes away the federal character.
De minimis?
No, when you're referring to taking away the federal character of it.
Sure, it becomes no longer federally entangled, it becomes
Disentangled was what I was trying to think of. So I want somebody to speak to the benefits of disentanglement so that I understand that better.
I'll shoot it.
Like the pros of disentanglement.
So imagine that you're on a county commission and you're doing road and bridge. Or imagine you're at the Department of Transportation Commission and you're doing roads and bridges. And you sit there and you've got all these federal regulations for the interstate. They prioritize the interstate, they prioritize the national transportation system, they prioritize the secondary, and then they just flow through to that money. And if you hadn't done an indirect cost allocation, which we haven't done, then we're just at the abeyance of the federal government to set our priorities. Once you implement your indirect cost allocation and disentangle that money from the federal regulation, that becomes money that you have available to do whatever you want to do with that. Now, here's a great example. Did you all listen to the conversation about the reporting your equipment and how it gets entangled with the federal government long-term and your right-of-way and all those things? Remember that? You have all those reporting requirements. Imagine that you just set a resolution to say, we are going to do the de minimis or the indirect cost allocation, and we're going to use that money to purchase our equipment, because then the federal government has no longer any oversight on that. You can use that piece of equipment anywhere you want. You can buy it, sell it, do whatever you want. We actually did that, and then we were able to get ourselves unburdened in administrative responsibility for equipment.
So are there accounting benefits to it too? Like, do you have to, once it's lost its federal character, does it disentangle it from certain reporting requirements, accounting requirements, whatever?
Yeah, it just then falls on whatever entity requirements have. The county commission, what have you. It's theirs under their authority to do as they desire.
So basically, if you think about it as, if you didn't have an indirect cost rate, you're basically paying for those indirect costs with your own local dollars, right? So if you claim an indirect cost rate, now the federal government's pitching in, they're paying for their share of those indirect cost rate, of those indirect costs, and the local dollars that you now don't have to use for those types of things is exactly what the director's saying. Now they can be used for other things, and they don't have a financial entanglement. They're not a financial, they don't have to follow the federal strings. And so it makes you have more flexibility with your local dollars, because you were going to spend them on indirects, but now the federal government's pitching in. So now you can use those local dollars that you were going to use for indirects for something completely different, and, with no strings.
And remember, if your commission or your governing body wants to keep that flow of money at that same level of money, you can by all means do that. You can still do exactly what you want, but that money could be used for the example of equipment.
I have a question, which, being the federal person, I probably should be asking this, but let's take the TANF example, Boys and Girls Club. That's HHS money that goes to ACF, that goes through things before it ends up in a local government. That is not my part of HHS, but I do know that much. Your county commissioners want it to go to the kids. If you take the 15%, can they then take that 15%, put it in the general fund, and make their own decisions about how that's going to help the community with that 15% that doesn't have the federal or whoever is deciding within ACF about what that TANF money should be spent on?
Absolutely. They can follow along with what the design is of that, or they can shape it to the fact of what they think. And typically, this is what happens. You go through all the federal processes and you have to follow every single rule, and there's this little sliver of unmet need for this unmet population. Maybe it's the ages, maybe it's the young. Then you have the opportunity, okay, we love this federal program, but man, it would have been nice if it was just 3% more to get this unique situation in our county or our city accomplished. It gives you the wherewithal to do that.
So I kind of have two questions. First off, we have not really pursued the de minimis rate. I work for a county government. And one of the questions that I have is, how does that complicate cash matches, especially if you're using an in-kind match, like office space or administrative, salaries of payroll and things like that, as an in-kind as opposed to a cash match directly to a grant.
So you can't double dip it. So you can't have an in-kind for your salaries and then have your indirect cost allocation against your salaries. But it actually gives you freedom if you choose to do it in the other way. Now, we have a lot of scenarios where we use soft match, but you can't double dip it. But what'll happen is when we complete this project, we'll go through there, you'll have this checklist, and you'll say, this is what's qualified, and this is how you're doing things. And if you want to continue to leverage the in-kind contribution, that happens in Homeland Security a lot, the in-kind contribution. But that's a conversation that we have to make sure that we just don't double dip.
And a second question, is this available on state grants?
I believe that if you apply for money and we have this process in place, that we should be recognizing the fact that if the local governments are implementing these projects, there's a reasonable expectation that we should have administrative costs included in the grant. That's important on the federal level. It's important on all the levels. And like Bob said earlier, there's been times where grants were awarded and they couldn't be implemented because they said, okay, we can't implement it because we don't have the administration effort of it. But when you're applying for your grants, whatever that happens to be, that's an expectation. So apply for the grant and then parcel it out. And I believe that everybody that's a reasonable person, this is one of the reasonable tests is this reasonable? And if you put it in your application and it's reasonable, then you should be able to, if you have that grant, there shouldn't be any resistance to that. Our job is to see that it doesn't get dinged because you're thinking thoughtfully about how you administer the distribution of that project. But again, on that level, there's a finite amount of money that gets allocated to projects.
Any more questions?
So is there any anxiety over the de minimis and indirect cost allocations? The mission here is to be thoughtful about opportunities. We're never in a situation of telling you what you have to do. The mission here is to be thoughtful about what the opportunities that you have. And then if you select a certain opportunity, give you the tools that you need to implement that, and also be available to have conversations that strengthen what you'll ultimately desire. So let's just plant the seed. We're doing this at the implementation of the modernization and cost allocation. We'll have the template, we'll have the rules, the 2 CFR 200, all those things in combination. Our intent today was, remember, how can we spread the peanut butter better? And the challenge is going to become, because funding is scarce. It's scarce on the state level, it's scarce on the local level, and it's scarce on the federal level. What we want to make sure that we do is don't leave some portion of the conversation in some dark hole someplace where nobody understood that it was ever available. So let's just bring it out in the open, have a really good, comfortable conversation about it, and make sure that the local governments understand they get to decide.
Thank you, Director Hibbard. So to wrap up today's conversation, the Grants Management Office, submit a technical assistance request for indirect cost rates. The State Budget Department, we have the methodology in place. We're modernizing it. We're automating it. We know what we're doing. Come to the horse's mouth. We will assist you on this. The other item is, depending on the type of grant, you can pull in money, and it's real money. And we've all been looking for more money. Where can I find money to hire a water sewer operator? Where can I find money to hire somebody part-time? Where can I find money that I just can't seem to find a grant for my little park, and I need to put up a new swing? This is a real conversation. We're bringing light to it. We need to take advantage of it and leverage it for every single community in the state of Wyoming. Please let us know how we can help you. We will always continue to say that, and we are looking for you to come to us, and we will assist you no matter what. Everyone, thank you, panelists, for all of your information. We're looking forward to chatting. Find us at the networking reception after lunch.
Thank you all.